leading up to the formulation of the new constitution for Fiji, the consultations, of course, before that, the Constituent Assembly, and the elections, all of which were announced by the Prime Minister, as you're aware, on the 9th of March. I'll take you through the two decrees. The copies of these decrees should be available in the next couple of hours for you to thoroughly study them and dispense the information in it to the members of the public. The first decree is called the Fiji Constitutional Process Constitution Commission. Essentially, this decree creates the commission, the Constitutional Commission, gives it a legal structure and a legal form. The decree recognizes the fact that this entire process has been put in train by the Prime Minister. It also then sets out the purpose of the decree, and that is essentially to ensure the full and free participation of all Fijians, and how there is a need to set up true democracy, respect for and promotion for human rights, and how the new constitution must include the non-negotiable principles and values that the Prime Minister had announced in his speech. The Constitution also the decree also sets out the actual functions and powers of the Commission, and it also states that in drafting the Constitution, after hearing from members of the public and also looking at the non-negotiable principles, the draft Constitution must also include immunity for the events that emanated back in '87. As you know, that was included in the 1990 Constitution, and that continued in the 1997 Constitution. It also then sets out the provision for immunity from 2000 onwards until the formulation of a new constitution and the subsequent parliament that will be appointed under that. It also sets out, however, a proviso to that immunity, and that is from the date of the gazetting of the decree, which is today, there won't be any immunity given to any of the members of the state or the RFMF or the Fiji Police Force or anybody else that's been appointed as an office holder under the state from any of the criminal provisions that is set out from section 77 to 390 of the Crimes Decree. So in other words, if a member of the state, if tomorrow I go and punch somebody, it doesn't mean I'm given immunity. I still can be charged under the law for that. But immunity is given for all political related issues. But there is a blanket cover of immunity from 2000 up till now, and that immunity continues until the first parliament is elected or the first parliament sits. However, from now until that first parliament sits, there is no immunity for criminal provisions or offences between section 77 and 390 of the Crimes Decree. The Commission then sets out in detail how the Commission will conduct its hearings. It must be in public, and how it will hear the views of everybody, how government will support the Commission, the Secretariat, essentially the Commission, of course, will be independent, the responsibilities of the Commissioners and the conduct of the Commission, and of course they must keep records, not just of their affairs of the day-to-day functioning and the submissions, but also of their financial resources and how it must be compliant with the Audit Act. The decree also sets out a provision that Section 8 of the Public Order Act, as amended, no longer will apply for this period from now until the Commission hands its draft constitution to the President. In other words, there is no requirement to have permits anymore for meetings. So from today onwards, until the time the Commission hands the draft constitution to the President, anybody can go and have a meeting without having to apply for a permit, except if the meeting is going to be on a public road, or in a public park or garden, or in a sporting arena. So if tomorrow you want to go and have a meeting in Civic Center, you can go and have a meeting. You don't need a permit. But if you want to have a meeting in Sukuna Park, you require a permit. If you want to have a meeting in Vodafone Arena or the National Stadium, you require a permit. But if you have a meeting in your hall, in a hotel, wherever, you don't need a permit. Notwithstanding that, you're still bound to follow the law. And the law is, just because you don't no longer require a permit, it doesn't mean that in that meeting you can go and do and say anything you like, in the sense that you can't go and say, let's go and kill everybody that's come from China or India or Thailand, whatever it may be. You can't go and say, let's go and burn the shops and streets, because that's creating public disorder. But you don't require a permit to have meetings anymore, unless it's in those three places: public road, public park or garden, or a sporting arena. The way that the Commission will work, they'll hear the submissions from members of the public, be guided by the specific provisions in the non-negotiable principles, and then they will draft a constitution. They will then, once they've drafted the constitution, they will present it to the President. From there, another process starts. And that is, once the President receives the draft constitution, he will then present the draft constitution to the Constituent Assembly. Now, that is governed by the Fiji constitutional process, Constituent Assembly, and adoption of Constitution Decree. That's the other set of laws that will apply to that. This decree essentially again sets out in the preamble the issues, how it emanated, how the Prime Minister made that historic announcement, and then it talks about the non-negotiable principles again. It talks about the staging of the process. It talks about the functions of the Assembly. It also talks about the composition of the Assembly, as the Prime Minister had announced, that the composition of the Assembly is critical in terms of ensuring that everybody participates in this process. So, Section 9.2, for example, says, the Prime Minister shall by notice published in the Gazette appoint members of the Assembly and shall ensure that where possible the composition of the Assembly shall reflect the diversity of the people of Fiji and include but not limited to the following: 1. Government, registered political parties, faith-based organizations, representatives of employers, members of the business community, trade unions, farmers and members of rural communities, Republic of Fiji military forces, national organizations, women, persons with disability, youth, pensioners, and other Fijian registered representative civil society groups. So then those members are then chosen, and they will participate in reviewing, assessing the draft constitution that will be submitted to it by the President after the President receives it from the Constitutional Commission. The decree then sets out the qualifications of the members of the Assembly. They obviously have to be law-abiding citizens, etc. And how the Assembly can form committees, etc. The procedures of the Assembly, what are the procedures they need to follow, the ability of the media to participate in the whole process, and how the hearings will need to be in public. Members of the public can come and listen to what they're debating, what they're saying, what they're arguing about. And there's a specific provision about public access, specific provision about the media, and how they also must keep, the Assembly must keep records. Once they have, there's also a provision that the Secretariat for the Commission will continue and become the Secretariat for the Constituent Assembly, if the Assembly wants them to continue. So it's up to the Assembly for them to decide whether they should continue or not. Once they have completed their deliberations on the Constitution, then they adopt it. And within 7 days, they must give that Constitution, or the draft Constitution, to the President. The President then, upon receipt of that draft Constitution, shall forward the Constitution to the Chief Justice, who shall within 7 days upon receipt of the Constitution appoint a 5-member tribunal which shall consider whether the Constitution complies with the principles and values contained in paragraphs D and E of subsection 3, or section 3 or subsection 2 and 3 of the section 8 of the decree. In other words, whether the Constitution adequately addresses the provisions pertaining to the non-negotiable principles and the immunity provisions. That will be their job, to ensure that the draft Constitution that is presented to the President in fact complies with what is set out in this decree. That will be their job. Nothing more, nothing less. Once they've done so, and if they believe there needs to be certain amendments made, they then give it to the President, who gives it back to the Constituent Assembly with the note saying, look, these are the provisions or these are the clauses that may in fact not be compliant with this decree. If it's the case, then they need to go through it again, the similar process. If it is compliant with this decree, then the President will essentially assent to the Constitution, and then that Constitution becomes the Constitution of the Republic of Fiji. So, ladies and gentlemen, what has been set out here is a very detailed provision, a sequence of events that must be followed, a sequence of events that gives credibility in terms of the process going forward to enable the full participation of all Fijians in the process. That is why from today onwards you no longer require permits to have meetings, so people are free to meet, but please, they must ensure that they do not use that as an opportunity to create disorder, to breach the peace. However, we believe that most people do not have that intention. They simply want to have a meeting. So they are free to have those meetings. They no longer have to go to the Commissioner of Police to apply for a permit and wait for that permit. They can simply have the meetings. Unless, of course, you intend to have that meeting on a public road, in a public park, or in a sporting arena. Or, of course, if you want to march through the streets, a procession. That has always been the law, has been the law for nearly 100 years. So if you want to march through the streets of Suva, or Lautoka, or Singatoka, wherever it is, you still require a permit, as you're required to do so, because obviously it affects traffic and whatever it is. But any other meeting, you can hold without a permit. We believe this will also quell the so-called apprehensions people had about their ability to contribute towards the Constitution consultation process. Do you have any questions?